Welcome to the introduction for our course Unpacking Behaviour, a course that offers teachers 10 CPTD points. Why would one take this course and what would their expectations be? Well, we always need to visit this because winners make a habit of manufacturing their own positive expectations in advance of an event. We only know how successful we are when we can measure if we've actually met our own expectations. And in order to do that, we need to set these. So you might take this course having expectations to notice children or people's behaviors, to understand these behaviors, to better understand their cause, to have tools to deal with behaviors, to inform parents if you're a teacher so that you can support them and that they can support the children, and also to know when you're in over your head, when you need to actually ask for help. And of course, asking for help, well, the next question would be, well, who can you ask for help? Let's take a look what we will cover in this workshop. So we're going to be looking at development as we understand the developing child. We're going to ask, is this person or child merely surviving or are they actually thriving? And what is the difference? We're going to look at reflexes and how reflexes can impact behavior. We're also going to look at personalities, both the positive traits and negative traits of personalities. We're going to look at behaviors. What are their needs? What is the question the child is asking you beyond the way in which they're asking it? We're also going to look at a learner profile, or a way in which a person, or a learner in this case, organizes their brain under stress. We're going to look at brain imbalances and what kind of behaviors we can see when there's too much activity in certain parts of the brain or too little activity in certain parts of the brain. It's also really important in this whole workshop to cover autism spectrum disorders because of the behaviors that we see with them, and having a better understanding of the needs behind these behaviors can again help you support these children, especially in this condition that is the fastest growing in the world, according to Dr. Robert Modelo. And then, of course, we're going to be offering you some tools. We end off with a movement program to help with all the things that we've spoken about in the course, and in order to take movement, to use it as a tool to regulate children and to help them focus and move past some of the issues that they're having sitting in the classroom. Let's just give you a bit of a taste of what you might learn in this course. And so, of course, we first want to understand the definition of behavior, and for this we look to the Oxford Languages on Google. In our work, we also understand that in our first functional area, so if you want to know more about that, you'd have to find out about our educational kinesiology courses. But within our first functional area, we have the question, do we choose to respond to something, or do we just react from a very reflexive brain stem almost, as we look at that green at the back of the brain? Obviously, when we choose to respond, we know that we can do this because we are calm and that we have access to our higher functioning brain. And so the word behavior is a noun, and it is defined as the way in which an animal or a person behaves in response to a particular situation or stimulus. And during this course, as you look at what I've highlighted here, we're going to be looking at the fact that do we actually, as I say, respond or do we react? I've also highlighted the word situation, where we talk about the space within which we find ourselves. But stimulus I've also highlighted, and we're going to be looking at the reflexes and things within our body that seem to make us react without thinking. And so these are the things that all come to play in the actions, the output that we see in children and in people. So in order to understand the behaviors, we need to understand the developing child, and we need to understand what needs to be in place for this child to move from egocentrical to an independent person who is no longer selfish, but has selfless qualities. And so our first little brick in our tower that we need to build is our primitive infant reflexes. They arrive with the baby actually already in place, having emerged in utero. And so baby arrives in this world with the survival package. And this is a part of that survival package, allowing a baby to move even while the brain isn't fully developed yet. And while it moves and can start interacting with the world, so the brain begins to develop. So infant reflexes are also really important to understand how the nervous system is developing, where this child is within their development. And we can see this through the movement or through their movement, through their developmental milestones. When all is on track, these should all be packed away, that being the infant, the primitive infant reflexes, so that lifelong postural reflexes can take over. When this is in place, there's no interruption from my senses, the information that's coming in through my eyes, my ears, my hands, my nose, my mouth, through my vestibular or my balance system found within my inner ear, and my proprioceptive system, the system that tells me where I'm in space. So when that information comes in and these senses are all coming in at the right space for processing, I can begin to understand my world around me. I then can begin to really move and engage as I move in a homologous way, being the top versus the bottom part of my body. I can move my sides of my body, so my left versus my right. And when I can move in these ways, I then can move across my midline in a cross-lateral manner. Gross motor muscles can develop, and as these develop and strengthen, and I can hold myself up for longer, so I can start developing my finer muscles. I begin to understand where I'm in space, so we see the understanding of spatial awareness. And as I move my hands and I'm watching what I'm doing, I'm starting to develop hand and eye coordination. With all this in place and the repetition of this movement patterns develop, and we see that movement no longer has to be something I'm thinking about, but becomes something automatic. And so it frees up mental space now for more academic skills. And so as I'm sitting, I'm not thinking, how do I hold my hand? How do I sit up? How do I move my hand to draw? And now I can really start engaging in a way that develops auditory skills, visual skills, and that will finally lead to reading, writing, and maths. So often we as teachers and parents, we start with the reading, writing, and maths, and we have got no understanding of this very complex system and all that is developing before them. As we continue to consider development, I thought this is wonderful to also understand, but we've got obviously electricity within our brain. Those are our brain waves. And we've got chemicals within our brain, and those are our neurotransmitters. So interesting to know, between the age of 0 and 7, these are our programming years. During these years, our children will spend most of their time in alpha and theta brainwave cycles, which is the same state a person is in when they are in hypnosis or in meditation. If you want to imagine your little children walking around in a permanent state of hypnosis, being programmed by the environment, open to suggestion, and in a super learning state. Children with learning problems, we also see often have higher delta and theta brainwaves during the day. So really important facts as we start to understand that these little ones 0 to 7 are sponges. They're basically in a hypnotic state just about as we read this. And what we need to understand is saying things like do what I say and not what I do is not going to work for this little child who is going to be copying the behavior you're modeling. Awesome little post. I've got it on social media somewhere. But the kids who need the most love will ask for it in the most unloving ways. During this course, this workshop, we're going to be looking at some quotes and some material from people such as Carla Hannaford and her book Smart Moves, which I highly recommend. And so she explains what really goes wrong with regards to our children. There's the book, that's the cover if you want to look for it to get it. And here's just a very small extract. So what goes wrong with our children? I hasten to agree that there are people with specific learning difficulties. She mentions emotionally handicapped children in this case as we look at the emotions and behavior. However, if we must label them, why not label them according to the underlying core problems rather than just the symptoms? I suggest the label so-so, stressed out, survival orientated human beings. And within our course, I actually give you a little bit more of an extract there from her book as she explains how stress starts affecting our children very negatively, and what stress has to do, obviously, as we look at this workshop, what does it have to do with behaviors that we are seeing in our children as we ask, are they thriving or are they merely surviving? Let's consider our survival kit as a little helpless baby who can't do much enters into the world. And so I've already introduced you to the primitive reflexes, but we also consider now our basal profile. This again coming from Carla Hannaford's book and her other book, The Dominance Factor, and she's actually got a course on this. And of course, there are some people in South Africa that can train this course that is really, really powerful for teachers, for learners, for colleagues and staff members. Okay, if you want to understand why is it that certain people are limited in different ways when stressed and how can you help them. And so reading from her book, I believe that your lateral dominance is basically innate, developing at around 9 weeks in utero as the Moro reflex for survival develops. At this time, it appears that the developing embryo establishes lead functions, a lead hand, foot, eye, ear, and brain, that's your brain hemisphere, in order to react quickly in a survival situation. Since our most primary need, these functions become hardwired in the brain and determine how we will respond during life-threatening or stressful situations to protect ourselves. And that's how her book looks. You also can buy it online. I think I bought mine on exclusive books online. With that, there's quite a few courses that share this kind of understanding of dominance within the brain and the body system and what it means. And so you can find out more about 2 left feet, the dominance factor, or optimal brain organization. As we consider this, we're jumping a little bit around and we're just revisiting this whole thing about our primitive reflexes. So active reflexes or retained primitive reflexes are big contributors to the following. What I underlined in this workshop, this course, was some of the emotional stuff that we see. Because sometimes when we think about a reflex, we think about us going off to the doctor, him taking a rubber hammer and him whacking our leg, and of course then we give him a nice kick. And of course we want to give him the kick to show that the reflex is there. That is one of our postural reflexes, our lifelong reflexes, and it needs to be there. When it doesn't respond, we've got a problem. However, with regards to our primitive reflexes, we don't want these to be seen anymore. As I say, these are packed away, and why they're packed away is it is a bit of our default system in stress, or as we weaken and we get older, and this is how our body tries to protect ourselves. And so when we have a traumatic experience, and this is something everybody experienced in COVID, we will see the reemergence of these. And also as we get older and our muscles are getting weaker, our body then brings them back out. Sometimes it doesn't help, because this is when you're going to see, as we read the list of things it attributes to, we can trip over our feet. We hate escalators. We fall easily. But of course they are there to try and protect. And so that's why we see them re-emerging. And so they do contribute in a big way to ADD, ADHD, autism, dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, speech problems, aggressiveness, allergies, anger and anxiety, asthma, attention issues, auditory processing, ear, nose, throat infections, eczema, hand and eye coordination issues, fear of failure, fear, phobias, fidgeting, okay, fine motor skills, so issues that we find there, food intolerances. We find it in children who have difficulty making friends, poor issues with memory issues such as long-term and short-term issues there, messy eating, mood swings, mutism, pencil grip problems, so there are pencil grips, poor dexterity, poor posture, poor self-esteem, poor stamina, poor balance, bedwetting, poor boundary setting, so that setting and understanding of boundaries, breathing problems, clumsiness, colitis, concentration issues, control being the need to dominate and manipulate, coordination between the upper and the lower part of the body, and that's getting back to the movement we spoke about earlier on, issues with copping off the board, crawling, and with children who crawled for too short or even skipped it completely, we're going to see issues come up here again. Criticism, frustration, handwriting issues, head control issues, homolateral movement problems, hyperactivity, hypersensitivity, hypertonic muscles, hypochondria, immune systems being low, lack of empathy, limited diet, low self-esteem, procrastination, reading problems, restless sleep, sequencing and timekeeping issues, sleep difficulties. So now we just get to sleepwalking or being afraid of the dark, spatial awareness difficulties, stiff necks, tactile defensive children, thumb or finger sucking, toe walking, vision challenges, W sitting and wriggling. And of course, there are more. If you want to find out more about these and how to help these integrate or inhibit, Rhythmic Movement Training is a lovely course, and we've now got Sonia Hawkins who trains it in South Africa, both level 1 and 2. As part of this course, I've also given you some tools so that you don't have to be an expert in everything. But if you've got this handbook, you can go back and you can check and also ask or answer these questions yourself. And so these are 2 of our behavior and skill checklists. And the trick here is if you're answering yes to any of these, you need to actually make an appointment, perhaps with an educational kinesiologist who has trained in rhythmic movement training, because these are definitely signs of primitive reflexes that haven't been packed away. And you possibly are going to need a movement program to help you do so. In this course, we're also going to consider our 9 personality types. You know, the need to be right, the need to be wanted, the need to be the best, need to be different, need to be smart, need to be loyal and feel safe, the need to be fun, the need to be strong, or the need to make peace and avoid conflict. And what does it mean as we get into each of these personality types? For both, or for all of these, we've got a healthy side where we are again thriving, and we've got an unhealthy side where we are merely surviving, and the behaviors that we might see in each state are going to be different. But once you know them as a parent, as a teacher, or even for yourself, you're going to be able to catch out when we are under stress. And of course, for each of these, there are triggers. So what are the triggers? We're also going to look at learning styles. So the visual learner who looks around when bored, the auditory learner who talks to everybody and makes noise so that he can stimulate the ears when bored, and our poor kinesthetic learner who needs to move and of course has the shortest attention span. And so how does that look in the classroom, and what might they be getting up to when they are not getting stimulated enough? With this, we also consider that our children have different types of intelligences, 1 of 9 according to Howard Gardner, and we're going to look at each of these and what that might mean for us. Understanding behaviors, to understand that there's actually a need beneath each of these. So beneath every behavior there is a feeling, and beneath each feeling is a need. And when we meet the need, rather than focus on the behavior, we begin to deal with the cause and not the symptom. And so yes, behavior is the tip of the iceberg, and we just thank Ashley Warner for this beautiful quote. We're going to be considering what need these behaviors are pointing to. Behaviors often are a response to an emotion and in a certain space and time. And behaviors can become subconscious reactions triggered by an emotion. And so the emotion is the recipe, if you will, that often triggers the response. And so these emotions, we're going to be looking at our anger, fear, jealousy, curiosity, happiness, sadness, and love. We look into these 4 needs, and so the first need is the need, sadly, for love and attention, probably the biggest problem that we are seeing in our world at this point. And that's why there's a nice big red warning up there. So self-harming behavior in youngsters is apparently on the increase, with parents spending more and more time on social media because they are not connecting and truly being present with their children. They are, if you must say, they are present, but yeah, not there, absent, somewhere else. And so this child is saying, see me, notice me, love me, connect with me. And it is the need for connection and love. And so when we see this kind of behavior, it is pretty sad, because it means this child is not feeling loved. And the behaviors that we see with this, there's a whole long list in your manual that you'll get with it, but it's tantrum, interrupting, and tattletaling. Sensory behaviors, like all things sensory, are often rooted in active reflexes. And this child has either got too much that they can't handle and their fuse has blown, or too little and they're trying to stimulate themselves to get more input in. And so the types of behaviors we often see is a meltdown as opposed to tantrum, crashing, bumping, rough play, that's that seeking play. And unfortunately, with these sensory problems, we sometimes have inappropriate behavior. Escaping or avoiding is the flight part of our fight or flight response to the things around me. And yes, it does still say see me and notice me in terms of the resources they need. They need our support when things are too scary for themselves. They do need that sense of love and connection there still. But these children often perceive that the resources that they have do not equal the challenge that is up against them. And so the avoiding, we often see they will do absolutely anything and everything not to have to do what they deem as very scary. They can become incredibly lazy, stubborn, they can drag their feet, they can hide under tables, they could even become the classroom clown. And that might be serving two purposes. One, to get them attention, but at the same time, if they do it long enough, they can avoid the things they feel they can't do. And the last is, of course, access to tangibles, where we want things that we want and we want it now, and we need to have it. So on a very primal level, getting things. And of course, it involves snatching, fighting over, and behaviors to get an object. So what causes us to move into these stress places where we react rather than respond? But reflexes, like we spoke about, the personality types that we have and the triggers that we have there, and then general stress. And stresses can be even in the forms of the toxins within our body, to the electromagnetic fields that we find ourselves in, to the actual stress of the work that's in front of us. And the limited time and huge expectations that we put on ourselves. And so this leads us into, this is a beautiful picture. It's an MRI done or put together by Dr. Chuck Hillman. And of course, he was showing teachers and schools in America why movement is so important. And of course, when we sit too long, the body sees it as a stress. And what I love about this MRI is it actually shows what a profile looks like within a brain. And so we see this person here, more thinking happening on the left, very little happening on the right, but of course not thinking anywhere with their whole brain. And so how can they respond? How can they react in a way where they've made that decision, thought through the cause and effect, when this is all that they have access to? Other things we're going to consider in this workshop is functional disconnection syndrome. And symptoms of functional disconnection syndrome are as follows. So this comes off Robert Malelo. I think I've given you, there we go. That is the link there. So Dr. Robert Malelo's research. This particular page is a screenshot from this website if you want to go read up more. And the symptoms of functional disconnect syndrome vary depending on the side of the brain with the imbalance. So we're going to be looking at imbalances within the brain. Learning disabilities, social disabilities, behavioral disabilities, and attention problems are all different symptoms that manifest from the disconnection of the brain. These symptoms can include difficulties paying attention, impulsiveness, negative behaviors, anxiety issues, the inability to quickly process information, reading issues, social awkwardness, failure to pick up on nonverbal cues, and unable to read people well. And so again, as we look at behavior, we need to consider impulsiveness, negative behaviors, anxiety, social awkwardness, not being able to respond properly within that social setting, and not being able to do so because I can't pick up all the messages that people are giving me about themselves, about their feelings, and about their expectations. Other brain imbalances, looking at the work of Dr. Daniel Amen, We're going to consider how the limbic system is all to do with love, connection, and mood. How the basal system is to do with anxiety. How the prefrontal cortex has to do with focus. How the anterior cingulate gyrus has to do with worry and obsession. And how the temporal lobes have to do with memory, temper, and mysticism. Again, we can look at neurofeedback to help with some of the balances that we're seeing in the brains, and of course diet and supplements. And of course there's a whole book, quite a lot of books that Dr. Daniel Amen has put together to help people. The one that I have just finished reading and I highly recommend is the book Change Your Brain, Change Your Life. As we consider autism spectrum disorder and behaviors, we're going to look at the quadrant, sensory behaviors, avoidance behaviors, the lack of the social skills that many of them have, triggers in the environment, challenges they may have in the classroom, and how to support children like this, finding people who can help, as well as just being aware of the children who might be like this in your classroom. With this course, you're going to be offered many tools such as a teacher's journal to just check how we as teachers, if you are a teacher, how you're doing. Are you coping very well? We've also got a book of parenting tips, and those are the two there, so you can just have a squiz if you like on over the contents to see what it's all about. We've got that reflex checklist I spoke about earlier on. That's it there. We've got a disciplinary questionnaire made available over there, and of course guidelines on how to answer it. And then guidelines for rules and for lifestyle. As I said before, we also have a movement pattern, as we understand movement is what helps us self-regulate. It moves us out of that profile I was sharing with you back into whole brain thinking, as well as being able to inhibit or integrate the many of the primitive reflexes that are the cause of some of the behaviors that we see. How can we help you? Other courses that we've got. So we've got our NIM course for 15 CPTD points, movement facilitators, Brain Gym 101, optimal brain organization course, hands-on course, 2 left feet workshop, fundamentals reading and writing course, unpacking behavior, this one which you've just heard about, solutions to impaired concentration, and autism short courses, as well as movement-based learning short courses.